How ancient humans marked their territory before borders existed. Imagine walking through an Ice Age valley at dusk. There are no fences, no road signs, no painted border, no map warning you that the land ahead belongs to someone else. But then you notice the clues. A line of footprints crosses the mud near the river. Smoke rises beyond a ridge. Animal bones have been cracked beside an old hearth. On a rock wall, a red hand reaches out from the stone. You may not be lost. You may have entered another group's territory. Ancient humans did not usually mark land the way wolves or big cats do. They did not need to leave a scent around every boundary. They possessed something far more powerful. Language memory symbols, shared stories, and the ability to defend a place together. Yet there is an important problem. Territory is an idea, and ideas rarely fossilize. Archaeologists can uncover bones, tools, pigments, hearths, paths, and paintings. They cannot directly hear a warning spoken 50,000 years ago. Because of this, no single mark can be confidently translated as, "This land belongs to us." Instead, researchers reconstruct a larger pattern. Ancient territory was probably marked not by one universal sign, but by many overlapping signals, some visible, some social, and some carried only inside the minds of the people who knew the landscape. The first boundary marker was the landscape itself. For mobile hunter-gatherers, territory was rarely a perfect box with straight edges. A group might move between a winter shelter, a summer hunting ground, a river full of fish, a quarry where good stone could be collected, and a seasonal patch of edible plants. Another group might use part of the same region at a different time of year. Their borders could therefore be flexible, overlapping, and constantly negotiated. A mountain ridge might separate two commonly used areas. A narrow pass could serve as an entrance. A river bend a giant tree, a spring, or an unusual rock formation might tell travelers exactly where they were. These places did not need signs because everyone had learned their names and meanings. Children would grow up hearing stories about them. This is where our ancestors hunted. That is where another people gather in the dry season. Never cross that ridge alone. The map was not drawn on paper. It was carried through songs, stories, directions, and memory. A person who understood the landscape could read it as easily as we read a street map today. A stranger, however, might see only rocks and trees. This may have been the earliest human border, a boundary that existed because people collectively agreed that it existed. But memory alone was not always enough. Groups also left physical evidence of their presence. A repeatedly occupied camp could become a message. Hearths blackened the ground. Broken tools accumulated. Bones, shells, and ash formed layers. Paths appeared between water sleeping areas and hunting locations. Supplies might be hidden for a future return. Most of these traces were probably ordinary products of daily life, not deliberate warning signs. Yet together, they announced that a place was known, used, and likely to be used again. To an experienced traveler, a campsite could reveal far more than simple occupation. Fresh ash meant the residents were nearby. Recently cut branches suggested they might return soon. The types of stone tools or the way animals had been butchered might reveal which community had been there. Footprints could indicate the number of people, the presence of children, and the direction in which the group had moved. Territory was therefore marked by activity. A group did not have to stand permanently on every hill. Its repeated movement through the same network of places created a recognizable human landscape. The message was subtle, but clear. We know this place, we depend on it, and we will come back. The most dramatic surviving marks are paintings, engravings, hand stencils, and other forms of rock art. Across the world, prehistoric people placed images on cliffs, cave walls, boulders, rock shelters, and narrow passages. Some were hidden deep inside caves. Others were created in open locations where travelers could see them. It is tempting to call every visible image a territorial sign, but that would be too simple. Rock art could have served many purposes. It may have been connected to ritual storytelling, teaching hunting initiation, spiritual experience, or social gatherings. The meaning of one image could also change over generations. Still rock art, had one extraordinary quality: it transformed a natural place into a cultural place. A cliff was no longer merely a cliff once generations had carved animals, people tracks, or geometric patterns into it. The location became connected to a community's identity and history. Anyone approaching it would know that human beings had claimed the right to give that place meaning. Repeated symbols may have worked like visual dialects. Neighboring groups could recognize familiar styles, just as people today recognize a flag, a uniform, or a writing system. A particular animal pattern or method of painting might communicate who made the image, which traditions they followed, and which network of people they belonged to. Some images may have appeared near roots, water sources, meeting grounds, or the edges of frequently used zones. In those contexts, art could have acted as a social marker, even when it was not a literal boundary sign. The red hand stencil is especially powerful. To make one, a person, placed a hand against stone and blew or sprayed pigment around it. The result was not simply a picture of a hand. It preserved the outline of a real person who had stood there. Was it a signature, a ritual act, a record of membership, a message to future generations? We cannot know in most cases. But imagine encountering dozens of hands inside a shelter used by another community. The wall would feel inhabited, even when the people were absent. The dead and the living would appear to remain together in the stone. Long before large cave paintings appeared, ancient humans were already using pigment and abstract designs. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, archaeologists found evidence that Homo sapiens were preparing an ochre-rich mixture around 100,000 years ago. Another find from the site, dated to about 73,000 years ago, preserves a deliberate cross-hatched drawing made with red ochre. These discoveries do not prove that the pigment marked territory. Ochre could have been used in practical tasks, art ritual, body decorations, or several of these at once. But the finds demonstrate that early humans possessed the materials and mental ability to create recognizable visual symbols. And a symbol did not have to remain on a wall. The human body itself could become a moving territorial marker. Pigment painted on skin-patterned clothing, beads, feathers, scars, hairstyles, ornaments, and distinctive tools could make group identity visible during an encounter. Before a stranger spoke, others might already recognize where that person came from. This would have been especially useful in a world without passports or written labels. A person's appearance could answer immediate questions. Are you related to us? Are you an ally? Do you belong to the group across the mountains? Have your people come here to trade, marry, hunt, or fight? Archaeologists have found ancient ornaments and pigments at many sites, but they must be cautious when interpreting them. A shell bead does not automatically identify a tribe, and similar styles can spread through trade. Even so, visible identity would have made territorial relationships easier to manage. The border was not only marked on the ground, it walked toward you. Sound may also have warned others that an area was occupied. Voices carry over open valleys. Rhythmic striking calls, singing, and perhaps smoke from controlled fires could reveal the position of a camp. Direct evidence for specific prehistoric warning systems is almost impossible to recover, so we should not imagine a single worldwide code. But humans are highly skilled at broadcasting presence. A group gathering loudly around a fire did not merely communicate with its own members. It also told anyone nearby that the location was occupied by many people. Sometimes being heard was safer than surprising a stranger. A call from a distance could allow two groups to identify one another before coming face to face. They might arrange a meeting, avoid each other, exchange gifts, or negotiate access to a resource. A boundary was often a social relationship, not a wall. One of the strongest territorial claims may have come from the dead. When people buried relatives in a place and returned there again, the landscape became filled with ancestors. A cave shelter or burial ground could become evidence of a group's long connection to the area. At Tinshemet Cave in present-day Israel, researchers have reported intentional burials, ochre, and unusual objects from roughly 130,000 to 80,000 years ago. The evidence reveals complex shared behavior among Middle Paleolithic people. It does not provide a written statement of ownership, but repeated burial practices could have anchored social memory to a specific location. Later, prehistoric communities made this connection even more visible through burial mounds, stone tombs, and monuments. These structures changed the horizon. They told travelers that generations of people were buried here. The message was difficult to ignore. Our ancestors are in this land, and our relationship with it began before you arrived. An ancestor could become a permanent witness. Territory, however, was never protected by symbols alone. A red mark on a rock mattered because a living community stood behind it. Groups could patrol routes, watch important water sources, track unfamiliar footprints, and challenge outsiders. Access might be granted through kinship marriage trade invitation or ritual. It might also be refused. The most valuable places were probably the most sensitive. A reliable spring during drought, a rich fishing location, a migration corridor, a sheltered cave, or a source of high-quality stone could support survival. When many groups wanted the same resource, tension could rise. Evidence from Nadaruk, near Lake Turkana in Kenya, shows that hunter-gatherers experienced deadly intergroup violence around 10,000 years ago. Several individuals died violently and were left where they fell. The exact cause is unknown, and the discovery does not prove that prehistoric groups were constantly at war. It does show that encounters between groups could become lethal. The ultimate territorial signal was therefore not a symbol. It was the knowledge that crossing a boundary might have consequences. At the same time, ancient borders should not be imagined only as zones of hostility. Boundaries could also organize cooperation. Groups met to exchange stone shells, food, knowledge, marriage partners, and stories. Some places may have been shared, gathering grounds where different communities renewed alliances. A stranger could be dangerous, but isolation was dangerous too. Human survival depended on networks. During famine, drought, illness, or local resource failure, a neighboring group might provide access to food or shelter. Flexible territorial agreements allowed people to move without turning every encounter into a battle. This is why prehistoric territory was probably less like a modern national border and more like a web of rights, relationships, obligations, and memories. Then farming changed the meaning of land. When communities began investing months of labor in crops, houses, storage pits, and domesticated animals, the cost of losing a place increased. Territory became harder to share seasonally. Fields needed protection. Stored food attracted thieves. Permanent villages required defense. Now boundaries could become more physical. Ditches, fences, walls, hedges, cleared fields, gates, and monuments made divisions visible. Instead of saying, "Our people return to this valley every winter," a farmer could say, "We planted this ground, and the harvest inside it is ours." The landscape was no longer marked only by movement. It was divided by construction. Over time, villages grew into towns, leaders claimed larger regions, and borders became connected to armies. Taxation law and written records. Stones could be placed to mark property. Walls could surround settlements. Rulers could carve their names into the land. But the foundations of territory were far older. Long before maps, humans marked their world through repeated presence. They remembered rivers and ridges. They painted bodies in stone. They buried relatives in meaningful places. They recognized the tools, ornaments, tracks, and symbols of neighboring groups. They negotiated access and sometimes defended it with violence. So how did ancient humans mark their territory? Not with one method. A ridge could be a border. A campsite could be a warning. A painted hand could announce belonging. A decorated body could identify a community. A burial place could transform memory into a claim. And a story could hold all of these things together for thousands of years. The most important boundary was often invisible. It existed inside the shared knowledge of the people who lived there. To an outsider, the valley may have looked empty. To those who knew it, every path had a name, every rock carried a memory, and every horizon already belonged to a human story.